Sarah Chen stood at the massive window of the Galactic Council station, watching the stars drift silently past in the endless black of space. Behind her, alien voices echoed through the vast chamber, and every word made her stomach twist with anger and fear. "The human problem has grown too large," said Overlord Vex, his crystalline blue body catching the glow of the chamber's energy cores. "They spread like a disease across star systems that should belong to more civilized species." Sarah kept her expression calm, but her hands curled into fists at her sides. For 5 years, she had served as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council. For 5 years, she had tried to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. Now, in this moment, she finally understood the truth. The aliens had never seen humans as equals. They saw them as vermin. Ambassador Chen was summoned forward by the ancient, ghostly voice of Elder Thorn, a Vorak whose translucent form hovered above the council floor. "Step forward," the voice commanded, "to receive the council's final decision." Sarah crossed the chamber floor toward its center. Dozens of alien species surrounded her, sitting in judgment. Some resembled giant insects. Others were built from living metal or pure crackling energy. Every one of them wore the same expression, a mixture of disgust and superiority. "The Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision," Elder Thorn intoned. "Humanity will cease all expansion beyond its home system immediately. Every human colony will be evacuated within 30 standard days. Earth itself will accept protective custody under Council supervision." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow. Protective custody meant slavery. It meant the death of human freedom among the stars. She thought of the millions of humans scattered across colony worlds, building lives, raising families, dreaming of futures the Council now intended to erase. "You cannot be serious," Sarah said, her voice steady even as fear raced through her chest. "Humans have broken no laws. We have paid every tax, honored every tribute you demanded." Overlord Vex let out a laugh like shattering glass. "Your crime is existing. You breed too quickly. You think too differently. Your species asks too many questions and refuses to accept the natural order." "The natural order?" Sarah felt anger rising in her throat. "You mean the order where the oldest species rules the youngest? Where freedom belongs only to those lucky enough to evolve first?" "Precisely," rumbled Counselor Dra, a towering tree-like creature swaying with the weight of his own words. "The galaxy was at peace before humans arrived. You bring chaos wherever you go." Sarah nearly laughed. These same beings lectured her about peace while plotting mass deportation and imprisonment. The hypocrisy was staggering. "We will not accept this," Sarah said firmly. "Humanity has the right to exist freely in this galaxy." Elder Thorn's form flickered, something like amusement passing through it. "You misunderstand, Ambassador. This is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum. 30 days to comply. Refuse, and the Council will use force." "What kind of force?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Complete force," Vex said, savoring the words. "Every human world blockaded. Every ship destroyed. Every survivor relocated to prison planets where they can do no further harm." Sarah scanned the chamber. Some faces looked almost regretful. Others looked eager for the violence to come. None of them seemed to care about the millions of innocent lives hanging in the balance. "Council fleets are already moving into position," Dra added. "Your colonies have watched them arrive for the past week. Soon they will understand that resistance is impossible." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The Council had been planning this for a long time, moving their forces into place long before uttering a single word to her. This meeting had never been a negotiation. It was theater, a performance meant only to convince her that humanity's fate was already sealed. "I need to contact Earth," Sarah said. "My government must know of this decision." "Of course," Elder Thorn agreed. But remember, Ambassador, any attempt at resistance will only make things worse for your people. Accept your fate with dignity, and perhaps some of you will survive." Sarah nodded and walked toward the communication booth, her legs weak beneath her, though she forced herself to move with steady, unhurried steps. She would not let these creatures see her fear. Behind her, she could already hear alien delegates discussing which species would inherit humanity's former territories. Inside the booth, she activated the quantum communicator linking her to Earth. The signal would take several minutes, even through hyperspace. She composed her message with care. Priority Alpha transmission to Earth Defense Command. Council has issued a final ultimatum. 30 days to evacuate all colonies and accept protective custody. Military enforcement threatened. Please advise. As she sent it, her mind drifted to her daughter Emma, studying engineering on the colony of New Geneva, and to her brother Tom, who had spent every savings he had to build a farm on Haven Prime. In 30 days, everything they had built could be gone unless Earth found a miracle. The reply came faster than she expected. Just 2 words, "Message received." Sarah stared at the screen. She had braced for panic, for desperate questions, for anything but this calm, almost indifferent acknowledgement. She sent another message. "Request instructions. Council fleets moving to surround our worlds. Situation critical." The response, again, was brief. "Continue diplomatic efforts. Maintain normal schedule. Will advise." Confusion and frustration boiled inside her. Did Earth not grasp the danger? The Council commanded fleets that had conquered 1,000 worlds, weapons capable of turning planets to ash, shields no attack had ever pierced. Or did they? She remembered something her father had told her long ago, back when he served as a soldier in Earth's last World War. "The enemy's greatest weapon," he had said, "is convincing you that you've already lost." Had the Council already won this fight in her mind alone? She looked out through the booth's window at the alien delegates, laughing, already dividing up human space among themselves, celebrating a war that hadn't even begun. But wars were never won by whoever held the most ships or the oldest bloodline. They were won by whoever wanted victory more desperately. And Sarah knew that no species in this galaxy wanted freedom more fiercely than humanity did. She thought of every colony scattered across the stars, built by people who had left everything behind for a chance at something better, who had crossed impossible distances and tamed hostile worlds through sheer stubborn will. Would people like that simply lie down and surrender? She activated the communicator one final time. Personal message to Emma Chen, New Geneva Colony. "Tell your Uncle Tom and all our friends that grandmother's old recipes still work best. Love, Mom." It was a code agreed upon years earlier. Grandmother's recipes meant the old ways, the methods that carried humanity through when everyone insisted survival was impossible. Leaving the booth, Sarah felt calmer than she had in hours. The aliens believed they understood everything about humans. They had studied history and technology, counted every ship and weapon, but they had never learned the one truth that mattered most. Humans had spent their entire existence being told they could not survive, and they had spent that same existence proving everyone wrong. The Council had made one critical mistake. They had given humanity 30 days to prepare. That might be exactly enough time to remind the galaxy why underestimating humans was always a mistake. Deep beneath Luna's surface, Admiral Marcus Torres stood in the command center, watching displays that tracked human activity across the galaxy. To any alien observer, it would look like chaos. Ships darting frantically between worlds, communications buzzing with panic. Humans, it would seem, scrambling to obey the Council's evacuation order. But Marcus knew better. Every second of that panic had been carefully choreographed. "Status report," he said to his aide, Captain Jennifer Walsh. "All colonial governments have received instructions," she replied. Evacuation ships are moving into position exactly on schedule. The evacuation ships look precisely like the slow, unarmed civilian transports they appeared to be. The Council fleets would see them and feel reassured, confident that humanity was surrendering without a fight. What they would not see were the hidden cargo holds packed with weapons, the military-grade shielding disguised inside civilian hulls, the fact that each of those helpless-looking ships carried enough firepower to level a city. Deep cover assets, Marcus asked. All operatives report ready, Jennifer said. 37 years of preparation about to pay off. Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. While the Council spent decades debating what to do about the human problem, Earth had quietly been solving it. Every human posted in alien territory had been carefully selected. Every trade mission had served two purposes. Every cultural exchange had doubled as an intelligence operation. The aliens believed they understood humans completely. They had no idea that humans understood them just as thoroughly. "Sir," Lieutenant Park called from the communications station, "all colonial defense positions are ready to drop their cover on your signal." Marcus studied the main display, a sprawling map of human space. Red dots showed Council fleets closing in on human worlds. Blue dots marked human ships apparently fleeing in terror, but Marcus saw something else entirely. The red dots were walking straight into carefully laid traps. The blue dots were wolves dressed as sheep. "Dr. Martinez," he called to a woman working at a terminal in the corner. "How are our electronic warfare assets?" Elena Martinez, who had spent 15 years building the most advanced artificial intelligence systems humanity had ever created, looked up. "The Phantom protocols are active in 17 Council systems. Their security networks have been compromised for months, and they still don't know it. We're seeing everything before they even do it. The Council's greatest strength, their instant communication across vast distances, had been built on the assumption that no outsider could ever breach it. They never imagined humans would approach the problem from an entirely different angle, disguising infiltration software as routine maintenance and letting it spread unnoticed through their networks." "Admiral," Jennifer said, urgency creeping into her voice, "the Council is demanding a response to their ultimatum within 6 hours. Let them demand," Marcus said. "We'll give them a response they won't forget." He sent a coded transmission to every human military commander across the galaxy. 2 words: grandmother's birthday. Across human space, ordinary-seeming colonists revealed their true purpose. A farmer on Haven Prime threw open his barn to reveal advanced missile systems. A teacher on New Geneva unlocked a hidden bunker packed with military hardware. A merchant on Far Station activated jamming equipment designed to blind Council sensors entirely. But the most critical operations weren't happening on human worlds at all. They were happening deep inside Council territory, on the crystal world of Zephyros. A cultural attaché named David Kim, who had spent 3 years quietly mapping the planet's communication infrastructure, received the signal. The aliens had trusted him because humans were supposed to be harmless. He pulled a data pad from his desk drawer, a quantum virus in disguise, plugged it into the main system, and watched alien text scroll across the screen. Within 5 minutes, the most advanced communication network in the galaxy would fall completely silent. On the gas giant mining station of Vorak Prime, engineer Lisa Hang had spent 2 years sabotaging the power grid. The aliens never suspected the human hired to improve efficiency was quietly preparing their downfall. She triggered an overload that wouldn't kill anyone, but would strand the entire orbiting fleet without power. All across the galaxy, similar scenes unfolded. Humans who had lived quietly for years among aliens revealed their true purpose at last. They weren't refugees. They were soldiers in a war no one had yet declared. Phantom Network reports all targets locked. Dr. Martinez announced, "We can take down their communications power and transportation simultaneously." The Council fleets kept advancing, confident in their overwhelming might, unaware of what was coming. They were about to learn that strength isn't measured only in weapons. It's measured in how cleverly you use what you have. "Sir," Lieutenant Park called, "the Council station wants to know when the evacuation begins." Marcus smiled. "Tell them exactly 4 hours. Tell them our ships are already moving into position." It wasn't a lie. Human ships were moving, just not to flee. "Are you certain about this?" Jennifer asked quietly. "If we're wrong about their strength, we lose everything." Marcus had studied military history his entire life. The greatest victories always came from doing what the enemy believed impossible. "Execute Operation Trojan Horse," he said, "in exactly 4 hours." The countdown had begun. Fleet Commander Zeth watched from his flagship's bridge as human evacuation ships toward the edge of Zapirian space, exactly as pathetic as he expected. Dull hulls, weak defensive weapons, nothing more than frightened prey. "Pitiful," he muttered to his second-in-command, Elix. "These humans surrender more easily than the Corvin did 2 centuries ago." Around his flagship, 300 Council warships waited, each one dwarfing the largest human vessel. Shields strong enough to withstand planet-killing weapons, cannons capable of shattering asteroid belts. It felt, frankly, like overkill for a handful of frightened mammals. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "several monitoring stations have gone offline." No explanation. Probably maintenance. Sith dismissed, turning back to the 12 human ships, broadcasting continuous surrender messages. Their fear was satisfying to watch. "Sir," the sensor officer suddenly called, alarm creeping into his voice. "I'm reading massive energy spikes from the human vessels." Sith's confidence evaporated. The civilian ships were now radiating military-grade power signatures. Their hulls split open to reveal weapons that shouldn't exist. Their engines accelerated at speeds no vessel their size should achieve. Red alert. Battle formation now. Too late. The human ships had already fired, not conventional weapons, but thousands of small, blindingly fast objects that scattered across the Council fleet, seeking targets. They weren't trying to destroy the ships. They were trying to get inside them. Boarding pods, Zith realized in horror. They're launching boarding parties. Each pod carried a single soldier in advanced armor, cutting through holes like paper and vanishing into the ships. Within minutes, explosions rippled through the fleet as systems were sabotaged from within. On Zephyros, David Kim watched alien networks collapse across the planet like dominoes. "Network down," he reported. "Zephos is deaf and blind." The same story repeated on 17 worlds simultaneously. Power failed. Transportation stopped. Communication went silent. In a single hour, a civilization built on instant coordination had been reduced to isolated, helpless fragments. Lisa Hang smiled as the lights across Vorak Prime went dark, right on schedule. "Phase 1 complete," she whispered. Beginning Phase 2. Across Council space, quiet librarians turned out to be demolition experts. Friendly merchants revealed themselves as combat engineers, and infrastructure began failing in ways that looked accidental, but were devastatingly precise. Back at Zephyros, Zeth discovered his supposedly superior warships had fatal blind spots. The boarding parties weren't capturing ships. They were turning weapon systems against each other. "Sir, our main guns are firing on our own fleet." "Impossible." "Our systems are isolated." But it wasn't impossible. It was simply something the Council had never imagined. While alien species obsessed over bigger weapons and stronger shields, humans had mastered the art of hacking and reprogramming anything they touched. All ships switched to manual control, Sith ordered, but the command never arrived. Communications were already compromised. His fleet, 300 strong, was being dismantled by 12 ships and a handful of boarding parties, and the math made no sense at all. Then Admiral Torres's voice filled every council bridge through their own hijacked systems. Attention, council forces. You are fighting the wrong war. You came here expecting ship against ship. We are not fighting your ships. We are fighting your civilization. Reports flooded in from dozens of council worlds, all echoing the same collapse. You built a galaxy-wide empire, Torres continued, but empires are fragile. They depend on connections. Break enough of them, and the whole structure falls apart. This is madness. Broadcast. You cannot destroy thousands of years of galactic order. Watch us, Torres replied. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid belts and gas clouds emerged, surrounding what remained of the Council fleet. 12 evacuation ships had, in truth, been the visible tip of an entire hidden armada. Our shields are failing, Elix whispered. The boarding parties hadn't just seized weapons. They'd crippled the power systems too. C's mighty flagship was dying by pieces. There was nowhere left to retreat to. Every stronghold was under siege. Every safe harbor compromised. Humanity hadn't planned to win a battle. They'd planned to win an entire war in a single day. Admiral Torres, Sith finally said, his voice hollow with defeat, I surrender my fleet. Smart choice, Torres replied. But this is just the beginning, Commander. Your council started this war. Now humanity is going to finish it. Elder Thorn materialized in the council's emergency chamber, his form flickering with panic as surviving members gathered in person for the first time in decades, their networks either dead or hopelessly compromised. This is impossible, Overlord Vex snarled. Primitive mammals cannot have destroyed our entire fleet structure, but the reports kept arriving, each worse than the last. The attack hadn't been chaotic. It had been perfectly synchronized across hundreds of systems. Status report, Elder Thorn demanded of General Crix, the insectoid commander who had led council forces for 2 centuries. 17 major fleet bases is offline, 43 communication hubs destroyed, nearly every supply depot in the outer sectors sabotaged. How? Councillor Draw demanded. Our security was perfect. They weren't outsiders, Crix said grimly. We've identified at least 300 human operatives embedded in our systems for years. Some we hired ourselves. The silence that followed was suffocating. A holographic display filled the chamber, showing ordinary human faces, each one tied to a devastating act of infiltration. Teachers who were intelligence analysts, merchants who were weapons specialists, artists who were communications experts. Every human working inside council space had been quietly preparing for this exact moment. How could we have been so blind? Vex demanded. Councillor Yara, rarely one to speak, rose slowly. Because we never tried to understand them. We saw what we expected to see. Primitive, grateful creatures. We never imagined they were studying us just as carefully. New alerts flashed across the chamber. Human broadcasts were somehow reaching every council world simultaneously. Citizens of the galaxy, came Torres's voice, calm and clear. This is Admiral Marcus Torres of the Earth Defense Force. We are not your enemies, but we will no longer tolerate oppression. The Galactic Council has ruled through fear, calling slavery protection and calling stagnation peace. Today that ends. We call on every species to help build a free galaxy where every civilization determines its own destiny. Propaganda, Vex shouted. Lies, but reports told a different story. Member species were declaring independence one by one. Sir, Crix reported, the Corvan system just withdrew from the council. The Melon homeworld is refusing tribute. Mutiny, Elder Thorn whispered. A galaxy-wide rebellion. It was worse than mutiny. Humans hadn't merely attacked council forces. They had shattered the very foundation of council authority. the belief that resistance was futile. "We need to strike back," Dre insisted. "Deploy every remaining fleet." "What fleets?" Crix asked bitterly. "Half are destroyed or captured. The rest are stranded, cut off from supply and coordination." Elder Thorn's form solidified with fury. "Then we do what should have been done long ago. We destroy Earth itself." The suggestion sent ice through the chamber. Planetary destruction was the gravest war crime in galactic law, unused for 1,000 years. "That's genocide," Yara said, horrified. "They started this war." Thorn replied coldly. "One planet killer, and the rebellion ends before it spreads." "It will prove," Yara said, "that the Council rules only through terror." Even as they argued, more reports arrived. Human ships were appearing throughout the galaxy, not to conquer, but to offer aid, technology, medicine, protection, to any species willing to break from Council control. "They're not trying to replace us," Yara observed. "They're trying to make us unnecessary." "Sir," Crix reported, near panic now, "human forces have surrounded Omega Base. They're demanding the surrender of the Void Hammer." "How?" Thorn demanded. "That system is the most secure in Council space." "Unknown, sir. Hundreds of ships appeared from hyperspace without warning." Vex laughed bitterly. "Of course. While we plan to use our ultimate weapon, they plan to steal it." "What do we do now?" Dra asked quietly. Elder Thorn's form began to dim, drained of energy. "We survive," he said at last, "and hope these humans prove more merciful rulers than we were." But as reports kept pouring in, it became clear humans had no interest in ruling at all. They were dismantling the entire concept of galactic government, replacing it with something the Council had never imagined possible: a galaxy where every species chose its own path. 6 months passed since the day everything changed. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood once more at the great window of the Council station, but nothing about the chamber behind her felt the same. Voices from dozens of languages filled the room as representatives from across the galaxy worked side by side. "The Corvan delegation has agreed to the trade proposal," announced Delegate Tess from the central podium. She was human, but she was far from the only voice being heard. 47 different species now participated in these discussions. The old council had let ancient species decide for everyone else. This new assembly worked differently. Every species had a voice. Every world chose its own representatives. No one could be forced into decisions they hadn't agreed to. Ambassador Chen called a familiar voice. Sarah turned to find Elder Thorn approaching, his ghostly form somehow less imposing, now more humble. "How are you adjusting to the new system?" she asked. "It is difficult," Thorn admitted. "For 3,000 years, my people commanded others. Learning to ask instead of command takes practice. But it's necessary," he continued. "The Millen were right to call out our arrogance. We ruled through fear instead of wisdom. What changed your mind?" Sarah asked. "Omega Base," Thorn said. "When your Admiral Torres captured our ultimate weapon, I expected him to threaten worlds with it, just as we would have. Instead, he dismantled it completely, broadcasting the destruction for the entire galaxy to witness proof that humanity had no intention of replacing one tyranny with another. That single act, more than any battle, had convinced frightened species that humans truly wanted freedom for everyone, not domination dressed up in new colors." A young Zephyrian delegate named Plex spoke up nervously during the session. "The defense agreement sounds reasonable, but my people worry about human military superiority. You defeated our fleets easily. How do we know you won't turn that power on us later?" Admiral Torres, now the Assembly's military advisor, wearing the insignia of the new Galactic Freedom Alliance instead of Earth Defense Force colors, stood to answer. "Our success never came from bigger weapons. It came from information, planning, and cooperation. The Millen gave us intelligence. Kelk shared insight into alien psychology. Even some Zapparans quietly questioned orders they knew were wrong. The defense system works the same way. No single species can dominate, because it requires everyone working together. An attack on one world becomes everyone's problem. Understanding spread across Plex's face. Human victory hadn't come from raw force. It had come from alliances. Which brings us, Delegate Tess said, to our next item. The Dra homeworld needs help rebuilding its industry. Who will volunteer resources? 12 species immediately offered ships, technology, expertise, materials. The old council had demanded tribute through fear. This new alliance simply asked, and people answered. Overlord Vex rose from the back of the chamber. 6 months ago, he began, I believed chaos would follow the council's collapse. I thought younger species needed our guidance to prevent galactic war. He paused, surveying the diverse gathering. I was wrong. The chaos I feared was cooperation I simply never understood. The war I braced for was peace I had never experienced. Humans taught us something vital. Peace doesn't come from forcing everyone to obey the same rules. It comes from letting everyone write their own, and then choosing, freely, to work together. Applause rippled through the chamber from a dozen different species. Even Elder Thorn's ghostly form radiated something like approval. Finally, Tess announced, Earth has completed the galaxy's first frontier colony ship. It will carry volunteers from 17 species to build the first truly integrated settlement beyond known space. Sarah felt pride swell in her chest. My daughter Emma will serve as the ship's chief engineer, she told the assembly. She'll be working alongside Zapparian crystal technicians, Millen environmental specialists, and Dre agricultural experts to build something no single species could ever create alone. As the session ended, Sarah moved through the crowded chamber, watching former enemies share drinks and laughter. Officers who had once fought each other now planned joint training exercises together. It's remarkable, Elder Thorn said, appearing at her side. 6 months ago, we prepared to destroy your species. Now we're learning from you, not from us, Sarah corrected gently. With us. That's the difference. Admiral Torres joined them, carrying reports from across the galaxy. All infrastructure damaged during the revolution has been rebuilt, better than before. Better how? Thorn asked. The old networks were built to be controlled from a single center, Torres explained. The new ones are managed by local communities, working together. Much harder to shut down. Impossible for any one group to dominate. Sarah looked around the chamber at how far they had all come, a galaxy once ruled by fear and rigid tradition now rebuilding itself on cooperation and shared discovery. Former enemies were becoming allies. Isolated worlds were finding new connections. Ambassador Chen called a small voice. Sarah turned to see children from several different species playing together nearby while their parents attended the assembly. A small Millen child waved at her. Are you the human who helped stop the scary council? The child asked in halting galactic standard. Sarah knelt down to meet the child's eyes. I'm just one of many people who worked together to build something better. The child smiled and ran back to the group, joining a game where children of half a dozen species built structures together, each contributing something the others couldn't, creating things none of them could have built alone. The future, Admiral Torres said quietly, watching them play. Sarah nodded. These children would grow up in a galaxy where cooperation between different species was simply how things worked, never knowing the fear and suspicion that had defined the Council's long, cold reign. Sarah Chen stood at the massive window of the Galactic Council station, watching the stars drift by in the endless, silent black of space. The glass beneath her palm was cold, colder than she remembered it being just an hour ago, and she wondered if that was simply her own fear bleeding into her senses. Behind her, The voices of alien council members echoed through the great chamber, bouncing off walls built from materials no human engineer could even name, each syllable landing on her like a small stone. Their words made her stomach twist with anger and fear. "The human problem has grown too large," said Overlord Vex, his blue crystalline body catching the light from the chamber's energy cores, refracting it into shards that danced across the ceiling. They spread like a disease across star systems that should belong to more civilized species. Sarah kept her face calm, the way she had trained herself to do over 5 long years of diplomacy, but her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails pressing crescents into her palms. She had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 5 years. 5 years of council dinners where she smiled through insults disguised as compliments. 5 years of treaties written in languages designed to confuse rather than clarify. 5 years of believing, against every quiet doubt, that if she just worked hard enough, humanity would eventually be seen as equals among the stars. Now she knew the truth. The aliens had never seen humans as equals. They saw them as pests, vermin to be managed, eventually exterminated. Ambassador Chen was called forward by the ancient voice of Elder Thorn, a Vorak whose ghostly, translucent form floated above the council floor like smoke that refused to disperse. "Please step forward," the voice intoned, each word stretching unnaturally long, to receive the council's final decision. Sarah walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor, each one sounding louder than it should. Around her, dozens of alien species sat in judgment, tier upon tier of them rising into the shadowed heights of the chamber. Some looked like giant insects, mandibles clicking softly in what might have been anticipation. Others were made of living metal, their surfaces shifting and rippling like liquid mercury. Still others existed as pure, crackling energy contained in shimmering fields. All of them stared at her with the same expression of disgust and superiority, an expression she had learned to recognize in her very first month on this station, and had never once stopped feeling in her chest like a physical weight. "The Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision," Elder Thorn continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, without seeming to rise in volume at all. "Humanity will seize all expansion beyond the Sol system immediately. All human colonies will be evacuated within 30 standard days. Earth will accept protective custody status under Council supervision." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, and for a moment the chamber seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Protective custody. She turned the phrase over in her mind, testing its edges the way she might test a blade for sharpness. It meant slavery dressed up in diplomatic language. It meant the end of human freedom among the stars, the end of every dream that had carried humanity outward into the dark. She thought of the millions of humans living on colony worlds right now, unaware, building new lives, planting crops in soil that had never known a human footprint before theirs, dreaming of futures the Council intended to cancel with a single vote. The Council wanted to cage them all, to fold humanity back into a single fragile system and call it mercy. "You cannot be serious," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her heart like electricity. "Humans have done nothing wrong. We have followed every council law. We have paid every tax and tribute you demanded, on time, without complaint, for 5 years." Overlord Vex laughed, a sound like breaking glass, sharp and delighted. "Wrong. You exist. You be too fast and think too differently. Your species asks too many questions and refuses to accept the natural order of things. Even now, standing before your judges, you argue instead of kneeling. The natural order?" Sarah felt her anger rising hot and clean, burning away some of the fear. "You mean the order where ancient species rule over younger ones? Where freedom only exists if you were lucky enough to evolve first, on the right planet at the right time, with no one telling you what you were allowed to become. Exactly, said Councillor Dra, a massive creature that looked like a walking tree, bark skin creaking softly as he shifted his weight. The galaxy was peaceful before humans arrived. You bring chaos and violence wherever you go. Look at your own history. Wars without number. Weapons built to erase entire cities in an instant. Sarah almost laughed at that, a bitter, disbelieving sound catching in her throat. These aliens spoke of peace while threatening to destroy human civilization with fleets already in motion. They called humans violent while planning mass deportation and imprisonment on a scale humanity's darkest tyrants had never achieved. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, so complete it was almost admirable in its shamelessness. We will not accept this decision, Sarah said firmly, meeting the closest of the crystalline eyes she could find. Humanity has the right to exist freely in this galaxy. Elder Thorn's form flickered with what might have been amusement, a ripple passing through his ghostly shape like wind through smoke. You misunderstand, Ambassador. This is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum. You have 30 days to comply. If you refuse, the Council will use force. What kind of force? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer, could feel it settling in her stomach like a stone. Complete force, Overlord Vex said with obvious pleasure, savoring each word. Every human world will be blockaded. Your ships will be destroyed. Your people will be relocated to prison planets where they can do no more harm, where you will finally learn the discipline your species has always lacked. Sarah looked around the chamber at the faces of her judges, searching for any flicker of doubt, any sign of hesitation. Some seemed sad about the decision, their expressions clouded with something like regret. Others looked eager for the coming violence, practically vibrating with anticipation. None of them seemed to care about the millions of innocent human lives they were threatening to erase. The Council fleets are already moving into position, Councillor Dra added, almost casually, as though remarking on the weather. Your colonies have been watching them arrive for the past week. Soon they will understand that resistance is impossible. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, colder than the glass beneath her hand had ever been. The aliens had been planning this for a long time, longer than she had imagined. They had moved their forces into place before even telling her about their decision. This whole meeting, every word of it, had been theater. They wanted her to know, in this exact moment, standing alone before them, that humanity was doomed, that the outcome had already been decided long before she walked into this chamber. I need to contact Earth, Sarah said, forcing the words out steadily. My government must be told of your decision. Of course, Elder Thorn agreed, his form pulsing gently. But remember, Ambassador, any attempt to resist will only make things worse for your species. Accept your fate with dignity, and perhaps some humans will survive. Sarah nodded and walked the communication booth, her legs feeling weak beneath her, each step requiring a conscious act of will. But she forced herself to move steadily, spine straight, chin level. She could not show fear in front of these creatures, not here, not now. Behind her, she heard the aliens already discussing which species would claim former human territories, their voices light and casual, as though dividing up spoils after a battle already won. Inside the booth, Sarah activated the quantum communicator that connected her to Earth. The signal would take several minutes to reach home, even through hyperspace, and in that waiting silence she found herself recomposing her message, searching for the right words to carry the full weight of what had just happened. Priority Alpha transmission to Earth Defense Command. She began. Council has issued final ultimatum. 30 days to evacuate all colonies and accept protective custody. Military enforcement threatened. Please advise. As she sent the message, Sarah thought about her daughter Emma, who was studying engineering at the colony on New Jiva, probably asleep right now, unaware that everything she had built her young life around might vanish in a month's time. She thought about her brother Tom, who had spent his life savings to buy a farm on Haven Prime, who had written her just last week about the first harvest from soil that had never grown human crops before. In 30 days, all of that would be gone unless Earth could find a miracle, and Sarah did not know, in that moment, whether such a miracle existed. The reply came back faster than expected. Only 2 words appeared on her screen. Message received. Sarah stared at the simple response, reading it 3-4 times, as though more meaning might surface if she looked long enough. She had expected panic, desperate questions, or immediate discussions of surrender terms. Instead, Earth had acknowledged her message as calmly as if she had reported nothing more urgent than the weather. She sent another message, her fingers slightly unsteady on the console. Request instructions. Council fleets moving to surround our worlds. Situation critical. The response was brief, almost maddeningly so. Continue diplomatic efforts. Maintain normal schedule. We'll advise. Sarah felt confused and frustrated in equal measure. Did Earth not understand the danger they faced? The Council commanded fleets that had conquered 1,000 worlds across 100,000 years of expansion. Their weapons could turn planets into ash in an afternoon. Their shields could stop any attack humans might imagine, or so every intelligence briefing she had ever read insisted. Or could they? Sarah remembered something her father had told her long ago, sitting on the porch of their old house, his voice low and rough with memory. He had been a soldier during Earth's last World War, had seen things he rarely spoke about. The enemy's greatest weapon, he had said, is making you believe you have already lost. Had the Council already won, simply by making her believe resistance was futile before a single shot had been fired? Sarah looked through the booth's window at the alien Council members, still visible through the glass. They were laughing and celebrating, already dividing up human space among themselves with the easy confidence of victors. They acted like the war was over before it had even begun, and perhaps, Sarah thought, that overconfidence was itself a kind of weakness, one she did not yet know how to exploit, but suspected existed nonetheless. But wars were not won by the side with the biggest ships or the oldest civilizations. They were won by the side that wanted victory more, that was willing to sacrifice more, to plan longer, to wait patiently for the right moment. And Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled her racing heart, that no species in the galaxy wanted freedom more than humanity did. She thought about all the human colonies scattered across the stars, each one a small miracle of stubbornness. Each had been built by people willing to leave everything behind, every comfort, every certainty, for a chance at something better on a world that had never known human feet. They had crossed impossible distances in ships that strained the limits of physics, and tamed hostile worlds through pure determination and no small amount of luck. Would such people surrender without a fight? Sarah did not think so. She refused to think so. Sarah activated the communicator one more time, her hands steadier now than they had been minutes before. Personal message to Emma Chen, New Geneva Colony. Tell your Uncle Tom and all our friends that grandmother's old recipes still work best. Love, Mom. It was a code they had agreed on years ago, back when Emma was still a teenager and the family had first begun discussing, in hushed voices, what might happen if the Council ever turned against them. Grandmother's recipes meant the old ways of doing things, the methods and preparations that had helped humanity survive when everyone said they could not. As Sarah left the communication booth, she felt calmer than she had in hours, a strange, settled calm that surprised her with its depth. The aliens thought they knew everything about humans. They had studied human history and technology for decades, cataloging every weapon, every ship class, every military doctrine. They had counted human ships and weapons with meticulous precision, but they had never learned the most important thing about humanity, the thing that could not be measured in any inventory. Humans had spent their entire history being told they could not survive. And they had spent that same history proving everyone wrong, again and again, in ways their doubters never anticipated. The Council had made a mistake. They had given humanity 30 days to prepare. That might be enough time to remind the galaxy why underestimating humans was always a bad idea. Admiral Marcus Taurus stood in the command center deep beneath Luna's surface, the walls around him humming faintly with the constant thrum of hidden machinery, watching as displays showed human activities across the galaxy in real time. To any alien observer studying these same feeds, it would look like panic, pure and unfiltered. Ships were moving frantically between worlds, their trajectories seemingly chaotic. Communications were buzzing with urgent, fearful messages passed between colonial governments. Humans were clearly preparing for the evacuation the Council had demanded, exactly as any conquered species should, but Marcus knew better and had known for years that this exact moment was coming. The panic was carefully planned, rehearsed in simulations run 1,000 times over, refined until every frantic maneuver served a purpose invisible to outside eyes. Theta status report, Marcus said to his aide, Captain Jennifer Walsh, without looking away from the main display. All colonial governments have received their instructions, Jennifer replied, her voice crisp despite the tension in the room. The evacuation ships are moving into position right on schedule. Marcus nodded slowly, allowing himself a moment to appreciate the scale of what they had built. The evacuation ships looked exactly like the civilian transports they appeared to be. Large, slow and defenseless, their hulls painted with the same faded corporate logos and colony registries that had marked human shipping for decades. The Council fleets would see them and feel confident that humans were surrendering without a fight, exactly as intended. They would not notice the extra cargo holds filled with weapons systems disguised as agricultural equipment. They would not detect the military-grade shields hidden inside civilian housings, layered beneath decades-old hull plating. They would not realize that each evacuation ship carried enough firepower to level a small city, waiting silently for the signal to reveal itself. "What about our deep cover assets?" Marcus asked. "All operatives report ready," Jennifer said. 37 years of preparation are about to pay off. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine one he had permitted himself in weeks. While the Council had spent decades debating the human problem in their endless committee sessions, Earth had been quietly solving it, one careful step at a time. Every human who worked in alien space had been chosen with painstaking care. Every trade mission had served a double purpose, gathering intelligence beneath the surface of ordinary commerce. Every cultural exchange had been an intelligence operation disguised as goodwill. The aliens thought they knew everything about humans. They had no idea that humans knew everything about them, down to the smallest details of their technology and psychology. "Sir," called Lieutenant Park from the communication station, his voice carrying a note of restrained excitement. "We're receiving reports from all colonial defensive positions. They're ready to drop the masquerade on your signal." Marcus walked to the main display, which showed a sprawling map of human space rendered in shifting light. Red dots marked Council fleets moving toward human worlds, their formations tight and disciplined. Blue dots showed human ships apparently fleeing in panic, scattering in seemingly random patterns. But Marcus saw something else entirely in those patterns, something no alien analyst had yet detected. The red dots were walking into carefully prepared kill zones, each one selected and refined over years of simulation. The blue dots were wolves pretending to be sheep, and doing it well enough to fool the finest sensors in the galaxy, Doctor. Martinez. Marcus called to the woman working at a computer terminal in the corner, her fingers moving in rapid, practiced patterns across the interface. How are our electronic warfare assets? Dr. Elena Martinez looked up from her work, dark circles under her eyes testifying to weeks of sleepless preparation. She had spent 15 years developing the most advanced AI systems humanity had ever created, systems that could think faster than organic minds and hide in any computer network without detection. The Phantom protocols are active in 17 council systems, she reported. Their security networks have been compromised for months, but they don't know it yet. We're seeing everything they do before they do it. Marcus nodded, satisfaction settling into his chest. The Council's greatest advantage had always been their communication network, the ability to coordinate fleets across vast distances instantly, a marvel of engineering built over centuries. But they had built that network assuming no one could hack it, never once considering that humans might approach the problem from an entirely different angle. Instead of trying to break alien encryption directly, human programmers had created AI programs that could mimic alien thought patterns convincingly enough to pass unnoticed. The AIs had infiltrated council networks by pretending to be routine maintenance software, patient and unremarkable. Now they were everywhere, watching and waiting for the right moment. Admiral, Jennifer said urgently, breaking his moment of quiet satisfaction. We're getting word from Ambassador Chen. The Council is demanding a response to their ultimatum within the next 6 hours. Let them demand, Marcus replied evenly. We'll give them a response they won't forget. He activated his personal communicator and sent a coded message to every human military commander in the galaxy, 2 words carrying the weight of 37 years of preparation. Grandmother's birthday. Across human space, people who had seemed like ordinary colonists began revealing their true nature, one by one, in homes and stations scattered across 100 worlds. The farmer on Haven Prime opened his barn to reveal advanced missile systems hidden beneath false flooring. The teacher on New Geneva unlocked a hidden bunker filled with military equipment that had sat dormant for years, waiting. The merchant on Far Station activated communication jammers that would blind council sensors within minutes. But the most important preparations were not happening on human worlds at all. They were happening deep in council territory, in places no one would ever suspect. On the crystal world of Zephyros, a human cultural attaché named David Kim received the signal through a device disguised as a simple wristwatch. For 3 years, he had worked in the planet's main communication center, slowly learning the layout and security systems with the patience of a man who understood that rushing would ruin everything. The aliens had trusted him because humans were supposed to be harmless, supposed to be curious tourists in a galaxy too vast, complex for them to truly understand. David opened his desk drawer and took out what looked like a simple data pad, unremarkable in every way. In reality, it was a quantum virus designed to shut down Zephyrian communication networks with surgical precision. He plugged it into the main computer system and watched as alien text began scrolling across his screen, line after line of confirmation. 5 minutes. The most advanced communication network in the galaxy would go completely dark. On the gas giant mining station of Vorak Prime, engineer Lisa Hang was doing something similar, her hands moving with practiced calm despite the enormity of what she was about to trigger. She had spent 2 years sabotaging the station's power distribution systems, installing safeguards and overrides so subtle that even the station's own engineers had never noticed the anomalies in their own logs. The aliens had never suspected that the human they hired to improve their efficiency was actually preparing to strand them completely. Lisa activated a program that would overload the station's fusion reactors, carefully calibrated to shut down power without endangering lives. Not enough to kill anyone, but enough to shut down power to the entire system, stranding every ship and every soldier in darkness. All across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out in perfect, silent synchrony. Humans who had lived quietly among aliens for years were finally revealing their true purpose. They were not refugees or immigrants, as the Council had so comfortably assumed. They were soldiers in a war that had not yet officially begun, but had been fought in the shadows for decades. Phantom Network reports all targets are locked, Dr. Martinez announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was confirming. We can take down their communications, power grids, and transportation systems simultaneously. Marcus looked at the main display again, watching the red dots continue their confident advance. The Council fleets were still moving toward human worlds, utterly confident in their overwhelming superiority. They commanded thousands of ships and millions of soldiers, weapons that could crack planets, shields that had never once been penetrated in 1,000 years of conquest. But they were about to learn something important about humans, something no amount of studying history books could have taught them. Strength was not just about having the biggest weapons. It was about using what you had in ways your enemy never expected, never even considered possible. "Sir," Lieutenant Park called out, his voice carrying an edge of anticipation. "We're receiving a transmission from the Council station. They want to know when we plan to begin the evacuation." Marcus allowed himself another small smile. The aliens were so confident that they were already making plans for human surrender, probably drafting policies for the administration of newly acquired human territories. They probably expected the evacuation to be a sad, defeated process, broken humans loading their few possessions onto ships and leaving their homes forever, weeping as they abandoned everything they had built. They had no idea what was really coming for them. "Send this reply," Marcus instructed. "Tell them the evacuation will begin in exactly 4 hours. Tell them our ships are already moving into position." It was not a lie. Human ships were moving into position, exactly as promised. But they were not moving to evacuate. They were moving to attack. "Admiral," Jennifer said quietly, her composure cracking just slightly at the edges. "Are you sure about this? If we're wrong about their capabilities, we could lose everything we've built, everyone we've sent into position." Marcus understood her concern completely, had felt the same weight himself in countless sleepless nights leading up to this moment. Humanity was about to gamble its entire future on a single, audacious plan. If the Council was stronger than they appeared, or if humans had missed something critical in their years of intelligence gathering, the war would be over before it had truly begun, and everything they had built would collapse in a single afternoon. But Marcus had studied military history his entire life, had absorbed every lesson from every great campaign in human history. He knew that the greatest victories had always come from doing what the enemy thought was impossible, from refusing to fight the war your opponent expected you to fight. The aliens expected humans to surrender or fight a conventional war using conventional tactics. They would get neither. "Captain Walsh," Marcus said formally, straightening his shoulders, "send the signal to all units. Execute Operation Trojan Horse in exactly 4 hours." Jennifer nodded and turned to her console, her fingers already moving. Across the command center, officers began their final preparations in quiet, focused silence. In 4 hours, the galaxy would learn that humanity had not spent 37 years in space simply exploring and trading. As everyone had assumed, they had been preparing for this exact moment, patiently, invisibly, for longer than most Council members had bothered to pay attention. The Council had made one critical mistake, a mistake that would echo through galactic history. They had assumed that because humans were young and small, they were also naive and weak. They had given humanity time to prepare, thinking that preparation would not matter against such overwhelming force. They were about to discover that when humans had time to prepare, they became the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The countdown had begun, ticking silently toward a moment that would reshape everything. Fleet Commander Zith watched from the bridge of his flagship as human evacuation ships approached the edge of Zapirian space, moving with the slow, defeated pace of prey that had already accepted its fate. The large, slow vessels looked exactly as pathetic as he had expected, their hulls dull metal painted with faded civilian markings, their weapons small defensive systems that could barely stop pirates, let alone a council war fleet. Pitiful, Sith muttered to his second-in-command, Commander Ilix, watching the feed with something close to boredom. These humans surrender even more easily than the Corvan species did 2 centuries ago. Ilix nodded agreement, his own crystalline form catching the dim light of the bridge. Should we board their ships to inspect the evacuation process? Not yet, Sith decided, savoring the moment. Let them run. It amuses me to watch them flee in terror. Around Zith's flagship, 300 council warships waited in tight, disciplined formation, a wall of steel and crystal stretching across the void. Each one was larger than the biggest human vessel by an order of magnitude. Their shields could stop planet-killer weapons without straining. Their cannons could destroy entire asteroid belts in a single coordinated volley. The Council had sent enough firepower to conquer a dozen systems just to handle a few frightened humans, and it seemed, in this moment, like almost comical overkill. "Sir," reported the communications officer, a note of confusion creeping into his voice. "We're getting strange readings from our sensor networks. Several monitoring stations have gone offline." Sith frowned, the first flicker of unease he had felt all day. "Technical problems? Unknown, sir. They just stopped transmitting about 10 minutes ago." Dismissed the concern with a wave of his crystalline hand, the gesture sharp and impatient. "Probably maintenance issues. These old stations break down constantly." He turned his attention back to the human ships, 12 of them spread out in a loose, unthreatening formation, broadcasting continuous surrender messages that begged the Council fleet not to attack. Found their fear satisfying, a fitting end to a species that had never known its place. "Sir," the sensor officer called out urgently, his voice cracking with sudden alarm. "I'm reading massive energy spikes from the human vessels." Sith looked at his displays and felt his confidence evaporate in an instant. The civilian ships were suddenly showing military-grade power signatures, spiking far beyond anything a transport should generate. Their hulls were opening to reveal weapons that should not exist on vessels of that class. Their engines were accelerating at speeds that should be impossible for vessels their size. "Red alert," Sith shouted, his composure cracking at last. "All ships, battle formation." But it was too late. The human ships had already fired. Instead of normal energy weapons, they launched thousands of small objects that moved too fast for alien sensors to track cleanly, scattering across the void in patterns that seemed almost organic in their unpredictability. The objects spread out in all directions, seeking targets throughout the Council fleet with unnerving precision. "What are those things?" Ilix demanded, his voice rising with something close to panic. Before anyone could answer, the first objects reached their targets. They attached themselves to Council ships and began burning through armor with intense, focused beams, precise and merciless. But they were not trying to destroy the ships outright. They were trying to get inside them, boarding pods. Zith realized with growing horror. They're launching boarding parties. Each tiny object contained a single human soldier in advanced armor, cutting through holes like paper before disappearing inside the stricken ships. Within minutes, explosions began rippling through the Council fleet as humans sabotaged critical systems from within. working with the calm efficiency of soldiers who had rehearsed this exact scenario 1,000 times. But the boarding pods were just the beginning of what was coming. On Zephyros Prime, David Kim watched his computer screen as alien communication networks collapsed across the planet in real time. The quantum virus he had introduced was working perfectly, spreading through Zephyrian systems like wildfire through dry grass, consuming everything in its path. Network down, he reported into his hidden communicator, keeping his voice low and steady. Zephos is deaf and blind. Similar reports were coming in from across the galaxy in rapid succession. On 17 different worlds, human agents were simultaneously destroying the infrastructure that held the Council together, each strike timed to the second. Power grids failed one after another. Transportation systems ground to a halt. Communication networks went silent, plunging entire regions into isolation. The Council had spent centuries building a civilization based on instant communication and coordinated responses, a system so integrated that no one had ever seriously considered what might happen if it simply stopped working. In a single hour, humans had reduced them to isolated worlds that could not talk to each other, stranded and blind. Lisa Hang smiled as the lights went out across Vorak Prime, the darkness spreading across the station's viewports like ink through water. The fusion reactors she had sabotaged were shutting down exactly on schedule, precisely as she had planned for 2 long years. Around the gas giant, the Vorak fleet found themselves without power to their shipyards and supply stations, stranded and helpless. Phase 1 complete, she whispered into her communicator, allowing herself a moment of quiet triumph. Beginning Phase 2. Phase 2 was even more devastating than the first, a wave of revelations rippling across the galaxy. Hidden human agents who had been living peaceful lives for years suddenly revealed military training that surprised everyone around them. The quiet librarian on Corvin Prime turned out to be an expert demolition specialist, her careful, methodical nature finally making terrible sense. The friendly merchant on Dra Station was actually a combat engineer who had spent years mapping the station's structural weaknesses under the guise of trade negotiations. All across Council space, infrastructure began failing in ways that looked like accidents, but were actually perfectly coordinated attacks, each one designed to look like nothing more than bad luck. Bridges collapsed at critical moments, severing key transit routes. Power plants suffered mysterious failures that cascaded through entire grids. Communication towers fell over in exactly the right order to create maximum chaos. Each collapse compounded the confusion of the one before it. Back in the battle near Zephos, Fleet Commander Zeth was discovering that his supposedly superior warships had fatal weaknesses he had never imagined possible. The human boarding parties were not trying to capture his ships outright. They were planting devices that turned Council weapons against each other, a betrayal from within that no amount of external shielding could have prevented. "Sir," his weapons officer called out in panic, his voice shaking. "Our main guns are firing on our own ships." "That's impossible," Zith snapped, refusing to accept what he was hearing. "Our systems are isolated." But it was not impossible. It was just something the Council had never considered in centuries of military planning. While alien species had focused on building bigger weapons and stronger shields, obsessing over brute force as the ultimate measure of strength, humans had learned to hack and reprogram any computer system they encountered, treating every network as a puzzle to be solved rather than a wall to be battered down. The human soldiers inside Council ships were not just destroying equipment. They were taking control of it, turning the Council's own arsenal into a weapon against its own crews. All ships switched to manual control, Sith ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, but the order never reached his fleet. The communication systems had been compromised along with everything else. leaving his ships isolated and confused in the middle of the chaos. The Council fleet was reduced to individual ships fighting without coordination, while their own weapons turned against them, a nightmare scenario that no simulation had ever prepared them for. "Sir," Ilix said quietly, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "Perhaps we should retreat." Zeth stared at the tactical display, his crystalline body practically vibrating with disbelief. His fleet of 300 ships was being torn apart by 12 human vessels and a few dozen boarding parties, and the numbers simply did not make sense. How could such a small force defeat such a large one that had crushed dozens of species across centuries of expansion? The answer came from Admiral Torres, whose voice suddenly filled every Council ship's bridge, through their compromised communication systems calm and unhurried, as though delivering nothing more dramatic than a weather report. "Attention, Council forces," Torres said calmly. "You are fighting the wrong war." Seth felt ice form in his crystalline veins as he listened to the human admiral's voice cut through the chaos on his bridge. "You came here expecting to fight ships against ships," Torres continued, his tone almost gentle. "But we are not fighting your ships. We are fighting your civilization." On the tactical display, Seth watched as reports flooded in from across the galaxy, not just from the battle near Zephyros, but from dozens of Council worlds simultaneously, each one reporting the same catastrophic pattern. Infrastructure was failing everywhere. Communications were down across entire sectors. Fleets were trapped without supplies or coordination, stranded in the dark. "You built a galaxy-wide empire," Torres explained, his voice carrying a strange weight of something almost like sympathy. "But you forgot that empires are fragile things. They depend on connections between worlds, on systems working together smoothly. Break enough connections and the whole thing falls apart." Seth realized with growing horror that the humans had not been planning to fight a battle at all. They had been planning to destroy an entire galactic civilization from the inside out. While the Council had prepared for war, humans had prepared for revolution, and the difference between those two things was proving to be everything. "This is madness," Seth broadcast on all frequencies, his composure finally shattering entirely. "You cannot destroy thousands of years of galactic order." Torres's reply was immediate and cold. "Watch us." Around Zeth's flagship, the last few Council ships that were still fighting found themselves surrounded by human vessels that had appeared from nowhere, emerging from the darkness like predators who had finally decided to stop pretending to be prey. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid belts and gas clouds for hours, waiting patiently for exactly this moment, revealed themselves all at once. The humans had not sent 12 evacuation ships into that system. They had sent an entire fleet disguised as evacuation ships, supported by hidden forces scattered throughout the system like a net drawn slowly closed. "Sir," Ilix whispered, his voice hollow with defeat. "Our shields are failing." Seth looked at his power readings and saw the truth laid bare in cascading red warnings. The human boarding parties had not just taken control of his weapons, they had sabotaged his ship's power systems as well, methodically, piece by piece. His mighty flagship, the pride of the Council fleet, was shutting down section by section, its systems failing like a body slowly losing feeling in its limbs. "All ships fall back to," Zeth tried to order, but there was nowhere to fall back to. Every Council stronghold in the region was under attack. Every safe harbor was compromised. The humans had not just planned to win a battle, they had planned to win a war in a single day, and they had succeeded. As his ship's lights began to dim around him, Zeth finally understood what had happened, the full scope of it settling over him like a physical weight. The Council had not been fighting humans. They had been fighting ghosts, shadows, an enemy that had been living among them for decades, learning their weaknesses and preparing for this exact moment with a patience the Council had never thought a young species capable of. The supposedly primitive humans had just demonstrated the most sophisticated military operation in galactic history, and they had made it look almost effortless. Admiral Torres said into his communicator, his voice filled with a defeat he had never expected to feel. "I surrender my fleet." "Smart choice," Torres replied, his voice carrying no trace of triumph, only a quiet, steady certainty. "But this is just the beginning, Commander. Your council started this war. Now humanity is going to finish it." Elder Thorn materialized in the council's emergency chamber, his ethereal form flickering with panic and rage, its usual serene composure completely gone. Around him, the surviving members of the Galactic Council were gathering in person for the first time in decades, forced together by the collapse of the very networks that had once made physical meetings unnecessary. The communication networks they had relied on for centuries were either dead or compromised, leaving them stranded in a room together, staring at each other with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "This is impossible," Overlord Vex declared, his crystalline body crackling with angry energy, sparks of light dancing across his surface. "A handful of primitive mammals cannot have destroyed our entire fleet structure." But the reports kept coming in, each one worse than the last, arriving now by physical courier ships since the networks could no longer be trusted. The human attack had not been random or desperate. It had been perfectly coordinated across hundreds of star systems, while the Council had been focused entirely on the evacuation ships near Zephyros. Human agents had struck simultaneously at every major Council installation in the galaxy, a synchronization so precise it seemed almost impossible for a species the Council had dismissed as primitive. "Status report," Elder Thorn demanded from General Crix, the insectoid military commander who had overseen Council forces for 2 centuries, his composure the only thing keeping the room from descending into pure chaos. Crix's mandibles clicked nervously as he consulted his portable data pad, the light from the screen reflecting off his chitinous exterior. 17 major fleet bases are offline. 43 communication hubs have been destroyed or compromised. Nearly every supply pot in the outer sectors has been sabotaged. "How?" Councillor Dra asked, his tree-like form swaying with distress, leaves rustling despite the still air of the chamber. "Our security protocols were perfect. No outsider could have accessed those systems." "That's just it," Crix replied grimly, his voice heavy with something close to shame. "They weren't outsiders. We've identified at least 300 human operatives who have been working in our systems for years. Some of them were hired directly by us." The silence that followed was deafening, heavy enough to feel almost physical in the chamber. The Council had prided itself on its intelligence services and security measures, had considered its networks impenetrable, its worlds beyond the reach of any conceivable threat. The idea that humans had been infiltrating their civilization for decades, hiding in plain sight, was almost too humiliating to accept. "Show them," Elder Thorn ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. General Crix activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber, casting harsh light across the assembled council members. It showed human faces, dozens of them, men and women who looked ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of faces one might pass on any street without a second glance. Below each face were details of their infiltration activities, meticulously documented. David Kim, Crix read from the first file. Worked as a cultural attaché on Zephyros for 3 years. We hired him to help improve human-Zephyrian relations. Actually, he was mapping our entire communication infrastructure. He moved to the next image. Lisa Hang, fusion engineer on Vorthach Prime, volunteered to upgrade our power systems for free. Spent 2 years installing back doors that allowed her to shut down the entire station at will. The list went on and on, each name landing like another small blow. Teachers who were actually intelligence analysts, patiently gathering information disguised as curiosity about local customs. Merchants who were weapons specialists, cataloging defensive capabilities under the cover of trade negotiations. Artists who were communications experts, mapping networks while appearing to study alien culture for inspiration. Every human who had worked in council space had been gathering intelligence, mapping defenses, and preparing for this moment for years, sometimes decades. They've been planning this for decades, Crix concluded, his voice heavy. While we debated whether to tolerate their presence, they were preparing to destroy us. Overlord Vex smashed his crystalline fist against the council table, creating a sound like shattering glass that echoed through the chamber. How could we have been so blind? How did we not see this coming? The answer came from an unexpected source. Councillor Yara, a member of the peaceful million species who rarely spoke in council meetings, preferring quiet observation to debate, stood up slowly, her presence somehow commanding despite her usual reticence. "Because we never tried to understand them," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the chamber's tension. "We looked at humans and saw what we expected to see. Primitive creatures who were grateful for our tolerance. We never considered that they might be studying us as carefully as we studied them." Elder Thorn's form pulsed with anger, rippling with barely contained fury. "Are you defending them?" "I'm explaining them," Yara replied calmly, unmoved by his anger. While we were congratulating ourselves on our superiority, humans were learning everything about us, our technology, our tactics, our weaknesses. They turned our own arrogance against us, and they did it patiently, for decades, while we were too busy feeling superior to notice. Before anyone could respond, new alerts began flashing on the chamber's emergency displays, their harsh red light cutting through the tense atmosphere. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy, but not through normal channels. These messages were being broadcast on human frequencies that somehow reached every council world simultaneously, a feat that should have been impossible given the state of their compromised networks. "Citizens of the galaxy," came a voice speaking in perfect council standard, clear and unhurried. "This is Admiral Marcus Torres of the Earth Defense Force. We are not your enemies, but we will no longer tolerate oppression." The council members watched in shock as the human admiral appeared on every screen in the chamber simultaneously. Somehow, the humans had taken control of their own communication systems, turning the council's own broadcast infrastructure against them. For too long, Torres continued, his voice steady and measured. "The Galactic Council has ruled through fear and intimidation. They have kept younger species in slavery while calling it protection. They have prevented technological advancement while claiming it was for galactic peace. This is propaganda." Overlord Vex shouted at the screens, his voice cracking with fury. "Lies and manipulation." But Torres was not finished. "Today that ends." The human attack on council forces was not an act of aggression. It was an act of liberation. "We call upon all species to join us in building a free galaxy where every civilization has the right to determine its own destiny." General Crix looked at his tactical displays with growing alarm, watching new reports scroll across his screen faster than he could process them. "Sir, we're receiving reports that several council member species are declaring independence. The Corvan system just announced they're withdrawing from the council. The Millen homeworld is refusing to send tribute ships." "Mutiny," Elder Thorn whispered, his form flickering weakly. "They're causing a galaxy-wide rebellion." The truth was even worse than that. The humans had not just attacked council military forces. They had attacked the very foundations of council authority itself. For centuries, member species had obeyed the council because they believed resistance was impossible. that the Council's power was simply an immutable fact of galactic life. Now, humans had proven that the Council could be defeated, and that single fact was spreading through the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. "We need to respond," Councillor Dra declared, his voice rising with desperation. "Deploy all remaining fleets. Show the galaxy that the Council still has power." "What fleets?" General Crix asked bitterly, gesturing at his tactical display in frustration. "Half our ships are destroyed or captured. The other half are trapped in systems where their supply lines have been cut. We can't coordinate a response because our communication networks are compromised." It was true, and the truth of it hung in the chamber like a physical weight. The Council had built their empire on the assumption that they could always communicate instantly across vast distances, a system so deeply integrated into their civilization that its absence, their massive bureaucracy, completely paralyzed. Local commanders did not know what orders to follow. Supply ships did not know where to go. Individual worlds found themselves completely isolated, cut off from the network that had defined their existence for centuries. "There has to be something we can do," Overlord Vex insisted, his voice tinged with something close to desperation now. Some way to strike back. Elder Thorn's form began to solidify, becoming more visible as his anger grew, his composure finally cracking entirely. "Yes, we can do what should have been done years ago. We can destroy Earth itself." The suggestion sent a chill through the chamber, silencing even the angriest voices. Destroying an entire inhabited world was considered the ultimate war crime in galactic law. It had not been done for over 1,000 years, not since the darkest era of galactic history that most species preferred not to discuss. "You're talking about genocide," Councillor Yara said in horror, her composed exterior finally cracking. "Billions of innocent lives. They started this war," Elder Thorn replied coldly, unmoved. "If we cannot defeat their fleets, we will eliminate their source. One planet-killer weapon fired at Earth will end this rebellion before it spreads further." General Crix consulted his data pad again, his mandibles clicking with visible discomfort. "Sir, we do have the Void Hammer stationed at Omega Base. It's the most powerful weapon in the galaxy, designed to crack planets, but using it will be seen as an act of desperation. It will prove to every species in the galaxy that the Council rules only through terror." Councillor Yara finished, her voice sharp with warning. Elder Thorn turned on her with fury, his form blazing with barely contained rage. "Better terror than chaos, better fear than the collapse of galactic civilization." But even as he spoke, more reports were arriving, each one undermining his argument further. Human ships were appearing throughout the galaxy, offering aid to any species that wanted to break free from Council control. They were not conquering worlds or demanding tribute, as the Council had done for centuries. They were providing technology, medical supplies, and protection to anyone who asked, freely and without condition. "They're not trying to replace us," Councillor Yara observed quietly. "They're trying to eliminate the need for us." It was a brilliant strategy, and Yara could see it clearly even as her fellow Council members struggled to grasp it. Instead of becoming the new galactic rulers, humans were showing other species how to rule themselves. Every world that accepted human help became a little more independent, a little less dependent on Council authority, and that independence was spreading faster than any fleet could contain it. "Sir," General Crix reported urgently, his voice tight with new alarm. "We're getting word that human forces have surrounded Omega Base. They're demanding the surrender of the Void Hammer." Elder Thorn's form blazed with energy, disbelief and fury mingling in equal measure. "How? That base is in the most secure system in Council space." "Unknown, sir. The base commander reports that human ships appeared from hyperspace without warning. Hundreds of them. They must have been the sort for months. Overlord Vex laughed bitterly, the sound hollow now, stripped of its earlier confidence. Of course they were. While we planned to use our ultimate weapon, they planned to steal it. The Council had been outmaneuvered at every turn, and the realization was settling over the chamber like a physical weight. Every move they might have made had been anticipated. Every weapon they might have used had been neutralized before they could even consider deploying it. The humans had not just won a series of battles, they had won the war before it officially began, and the Council was only now beginning to understand the full scope of what had happened to them. "What do we do now?" Councillor Dra asked quietly, his tree-like form drooping with something like exhaustion. Elder Thorn's form began to fade as his energy was exhausted, the fight finally draining out of him entirely. "We survive," he said finally. "And we hope that these humans prove to be more merciful rulers than we were." But as reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy, it became clear that humans had no intention of becoming rulers at all. They were dismantling the entire concept of galactic government, replacing it with something the Council had never considered possible. A galaxy where every species was free to choose its own path among the stars. The age of the Galactic Council was ending. The age of freedom had begun. 6 months had passed since the day that changed everything. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood once again at the great window of the Council station, but everything was different now, transformed in ways she could still barely believe. The chamber behind her buzzed with voices, speaking dozens of languages as representatives from across the galaxy worked together to build something entirely new, something that had never existed before in the long history of the galaxy. "The Corvin delegation has agreed to the trade proposal," announced Delegate Tess from her position at the central podium, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's improved acoustics. She was human, but she was not the only one speaking. Today, representatives from 47 different species were participating in the discussion, each voice given equal weight for the first time in recorded galactic history. Sarah smiled as she watched the proceedings unfold around her. The Old Council had been a place where ancient species made decisions for everyone else, where power flowed in only one direction, downward from the oldest and strongest to everyone beneath them. The new assembly was something completely different, built on principles the Council had never even considered. Every species had a voice. Every world could choose its own representatives. Most importantly, no one could be forced to obey decisions they did not agree with, a simple principle that had taken the galaxy 1,000 years and a single desperate rebellion to discover. Ambassador Chen called a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Elder Thorn approaching, but his ghostly form looked different now, less imposing, more humble. The fire that had once burned so brightly in his anger now settled into something quieter. "Elder Thorn," Sarah replied politely. "How are you adjusting to the new system?" The ancient Vorak flickered, with what might have been embarrassment, a subtle ripple passing through his translucent form. "It is difficult," he admitted. "For 3,000 years, my people have been accustomed to making decisions for others. Learning to ask instead of command requires practice. More practice than I expected at my age." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight behind his words better than most. Many of the former Council species were struggling with the transition, having built their entire civilizations around the idea that age and power gave them the right to rule others. Accepting equality was not easy for them, and Sarah had come to respect the genuine effort many of them were making, even when that effort came slowly and imperfectly. "But it is necessary," Thorn continued, his voice carrying a quiet conviction that had not been there 6 months ago. "The Millen were right to call us out for our arrogance. We ruled through fear instead of wisdom. We prevented progress instead of encouraging it. What made you change your mind?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Thorn's form pulsed thoughtfully, taking a long moment before answering. The evacuation of Omega Base, he said finally. When your Admiral Torres captured our ultimate weapon, I expected him to use it as we would have, to threaten worlds into submission, to make an example of our defeat. Sarah remembered that day well, could still recall the tension that had gripped the entire galaxy in those hours. The Void Hammer had been the Council's most terrible secret, a weapon that could destroy entire planets in a single strike. When human forces had surrounded the base where it was kept, everyone had expected a massive, bloody battle. Instead, Thorn continued, Admiral Torres had done something that shocked the galaxy. Instead of using the weapon, he dismantled it completely. He broadcast the destruction live so everyone could see that humanity had no intention of replacing one tyranny with another. That had been the moment when real change became possible across the galaxy, the moment when species that had feared human domination realized that humans truly wanted freedom for everyone, not just themselves. The rebellion had transformed into a revolution of cooperation instead of conquest, transformation few had thought possible in the immediate aftermath of such devastating military victories. Ambassador called Captain Walsh from the assembly floor. The Zephyrian representative has a question about the defense protocols. Sarah walked back to her seat among the other delegates, the chamber's warm light catching the polished surfaces of the new assembly hall, a room designed by a dozen species working together, rather than a single dominant power dictating its aesthetic to everyone else. The question came from a young Zephyrian named Plex, whose crystalline form sparkled with nervous energy as he addressed the assembly. The proposed mutual defense agreement sounds reasonable, Plex said carefully, choosing his words with obvious care. But my people are concerned about human military superiority. Your forces defeated our fleets easily. How do we know you won't use that power against us later? It was a fair question, one that came up often in the new assembly, echoing through countless similar discussions over the past 6 months. The galaxy had seen what human military planning could accomplish, and many species worried that cooperation might just be another form of conquest, more patient and more subtle than the Council's had been, but no less dangerous in the end. Admiral Torres, who now served as the Assembly's military advisor, stood to respond, his uniform different now from the one he had worn during the war. Instead of Earth Defense Force insignia, it bore the symbol of the new Galactic Freedom Alliance, a design that had been chosen collaboratively by representatives from a dozen different species. Your concern is understandable, Torres said respectfully, meeting Plex's crystalline gaze directly. But you're thinking about this the wrong way. Human military success didn't come from superior technology or larger fleets. It came from information planning, and most importantly, cooperation. He activated a holographic display that showed the war from a strategic perspective, the same battle map that had once tracked the collapse of the Council's forces, now serving as an educational tool. Every human operation succeeded because we had help from species who were tired of Council oppression. The Millen provided intelligence about Council movements. The Kelk shared their knowledge of alien psychology. Even some Zapparans helped us understand your own systems well enough to know where they were vulnerable. Understanding slowly dawned across X's crystalline features as the implications settled in. Human victory had never come from raw force alone. It had come from alliances, from a network of cooperation that the Council, in its arrogance, had never bothered to build. Which brings us, Delegate Tess said, to our next item. The Dra homeworld needs help rebuilding its industry after the war's disruptions. Who will volunteer resources? 12 species immediately offered ships, technology expertise, and materials, their responses coming so quickly that Tess had to pause the proceedings to properly record them all. The old council had demanded tribute through fear, extracting resources through threats and intimidation. This new alliance simply asked, and people answered freely and without resentment. Overlord Vex rose from the back of the chamber, his crystalline form catching the light in a way that seemed almost humble compared to the aggressive posturing Sarah remembered from their first meeting. 6 months ago, he began, his voice carrying none of its old arrogance. I believed chaos would follow the Council's collapse. I thought younger species needed our guidance to prevent galactic war. He paused, surveying the diverse gathering with something that looked almost like wonder. I was wrong. The chaos I feared was cooperation I simply never understood. The war I braced for was peace I had never experienced. Humans taught us something vital. Peace doesn't come from forcing everyone to obey the same rules. It comes from letting everyone write their own, and then choosing freely to work together. Applause rippled through the chamber from a dozen different species, a sound Sarah had never once heard in the old council chambers, where dissent had always been met with cold silence rather than genuine engagement. Even Elder Thorn's ghostly form radiated something like approval, a subtle warmth that had not been present his earlier, more guarded demeanor. Finally, Tess announced, consulting her notes one last time, Earth has completed the galaxy's first frontier colony ship. It will carry volunteers from 17 species to build the first truly integrated settlement beyond known space. Sarah felt pride swell in her chest, warm and unexpected. My daughter Emma will serve as the ship's chief engineer, she told the assembly, her voice carrying a note of quiet joy she made no effort to hide. She'll be working alongside Zephyrian crystal technicians, Millen environmental specialists, and Dre agricultural experts to build something no single species could ever create alone. As the session ended, Sarah moved through the crowded chamber, watching former enemies share drinks and laughter in ways that would have been unimaginable just 6 months earlier. Officers who had once fought each other now planned joint training exercises together, comparing notes on tactics and strategy with the easy familiarity of colleagues, rather than the wary distance of former adversaries. It's remarkable, Elder Thorn said, appearing at her side as she paused near the great window. 6 months ago, we prepared to destroy your species. Now we're learning from you, not from us, Sarah corrected gently, turning to meet his ghostly gaze. With us. That's the difference. Admiral Torres joined them a moment later, carrying reports from across the galaxy, his expression carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who had helped build something he could finally be proud of. All infrastructure damaged during the revolution has been rebuilt, better than before. Better how? Thorn asked, curiosity evident in his flickering form. The old networks were built to be controlled from a single center, Torres explained, gesturing at the assembly hall around them. The new ones are managed by local communities, working together. Much harder to shut down. Impossible for any one group to dominate. Sarah looked around the chamber, taking in how far they had all come. A galaxy once ruled by fear and rigid tradition now rebuilding itself on cooperation and shared discovery. Former enemies were becoming allies, their old grievances slowly giving way to genuine partnership. Isolated worlds were finding new connections, weaving themselves into a web of mutual support that the old council had never thought possible, or perhaps had simply never wanted to allow. Ambassador Chen called a small voice near the window. Sarah turned to see children from several different species playing together nearby while their parents attended the assembly, their laughter carrying an easy, unself-conscious joy. A small Million child waved at her enthusiastically. Are you the human who helped stop the scary council? The child asked in halting galactic standard, her voice carrying the innocent directness that only children seemed capable of. Sarah knelt down to meet the child's eyes, her knees pressing against the cool floor of the chamber. "I'm just one of many people who worked together to build something better." The child smiled and ran back to the group, joining a game where children of half a dozen species built structures together, each contributing something the others, creating things none of them could have built alone. A young Xaperian added crystalline supports to a structure a Dra child had grown from living wood, while a million toddler carefully arranged glowing stones around the base, the whole creation taking shape through a collaboration none of the adults had needed to teach them. "The future," Admiral Torres said quietly, watching them play, his voice carrying something close to reverence. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her like something warm rather than heavy. These children would grow up in a galaxy where cooperation between different species was simply how things worked, a fact of daily life rather than a hard-won achievement. They would never know the fear and suspicion that had defined the Council's long, cold reign, never understand instinctively what it had felt like to stand in a chamber full of judges who saw you as nothing more than a problem to be solved. The stars outside the great window continued their slow, silent drift, the same stars Sarah had watched on that terrible day 6 months ago when everything had seemed lost. But everything had changed since then, transformed with courage and patience, and 37 years of quiet preparation that no one had known was happening until the moment it mattered most. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had liberated it, and in doing so, had discovered something the ancient species had spent thousands of years failing to learn, that true strength was never about ruling over others, but about standing beside them.